focus on our facilities. Would everyone please rise and pledge tonight?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we please have roll call?
Mr. Bell.
Here.
Mr. Ackerman.
Here.
Mr. Azar.
Here.
Mrs. Henderson.
Here.
Mrs. Hilton.
Here.
Mrs. Terry.
Here.
Mr. Murray.
Here.
Mr. Robeson.
Here.
And Mrs. King. Here. Welcome. Thank you.
Okay, can we have a motion to approve the agenda, which is behind us here? So moved.
Are we approving it then?
Yeah, just put her hand up.
Are we putting? Okay.
Let's go Robert's rules.
Yeah. Okay, so all in favor? Motion carries. Very good. We're going to move into the committee reports, and I notice you have facilities first, Dr. Shaver. Do we want to switch that and have the finance first?
We can do that.
Since we just finished the finance committee, it's hopefully fresh on our minds. You know.
Well, we just had a presentation from PFM on what our numbers look like moving forward for how much we have the capacity to borrow given our current budget forecast. And one of the takeaways for me from that meeting was we need to pick that number. Once we pick that number, we can start moving forward on our projects. We have to name our projects. These funds are directly tied to these projects. So there is no, we're going to borrow this money and we're going to sit on it for a year or two. That's how we move forward. And given the numbers that they presented to us, the realistic number for us, the highest realistic number for us is about 90 million. And that is what we are working on. And as I recall, Rod, in the facilities committee meeting, we still do Mr. Azar in the work session. Okay. He had mentioned that during his meeting that, a couple times we got to pivot or we got to punt that to the finance committee before we can have these conversations. And so with that segue, we can start talking about our facilities options, given that we have a good understanding of what our numbers look like. Do you have any questions on that 90 million number that we are kind of working off of right now?
So that 90 million, just to clarify, is what the consultants told us is generally the reasonable amount we could expect to raise without a referendum.
Exactly.
Within our budget.
Within the Act 1 index and with the millage rate, I can put that back up. With the millage rate going up, honestly, to the index per year for the next couple of years, that is what we can afford. So if we wanted to go above that index, we have to hold a referendum. Any questions on that?
Yeah. So you're saying that our consultants are recommending?
I
This
am
is
not
the
saying that.
proposal?
I am saying that our consultants presented us with numbers, and the most realistic one, given the parameters that we gave them, for us to afford is 90 million.
Thanks for that clarification.
What are the operating assumptions of what types of money make up the 90? Is it 50% bonds, 20% donations, 20% referendum, 20% taxes? What's the breakdown of the whole?
Do you want to go?
Sure.
So Zach Williard from PFM. So in the previous presentation, what we showed was $90 million being borrowed for the project. So I think that's the conservative version. If we were able to get donations or other things that would come in to help minimize the amount, we could borrow less as we go through the financing plan. The financing plan will be done over multiple years, so it does allow for the plan to change, and that was one of the main takeaways of what we wanted to say before this meeting was that while we put together a roadmap of how this might look over a 3 or 4 or 5 year period of borrowing money, phasing it into your budget and paying for the project, that I can almost guarantee that what we show you on day one isn't how we're going to finish, because the markets will change, the timing of the project will change, costs will change, so things we'll move around and we will adjust the plan as needed. And one of those adjustments could be, you know, if you get a donation of something were to come in, that we would just borrow less money out on the long end to adjust for that. That
So increase, the
No,
number
it
is
doesn't.
only,
doesn't.
it's only the debt service, given this board voting to increase villagers.
So it's
Only that.
a 100% bond, is it?
Correct.
That's it. There's no other source.
That's what we're assuming right now. Correct.
We did ask the question, Mr. Robeson, from PCA last week and from PFM and PNC today, if in their experience, all three of them, have there ever been meaningful, so-called seven-figure donation from anybody in the state towards academic, not extracurricular facilities, but towards building a school. The only example Dr. Schaefer actually found it was Steve Schwarzman, the founder of Blackstone, which is the largest private equity firm in the world, made a donation to his alma mater, Abington High School, not to be confused with Abington Heights, of $25 million, which was earmarked for nothing. They could use it on whatever they chose. They didn't know of any other examples. There's certainly been examples where people went out and raised $500,000 or $1 million for extracurricular projects, turf, scoreboards, other things. But other than that example in Pennsylvania, and then there's another example that I found through someone, Jeff Bezos, his ex-wife made a similar sized donation to a Texas school. But there don't seem to be many private donations that would go to public schools. Private schools, yes. Colleges, yes. But public schools, the consultants, all three of them, didn't have any examples.
What was Schwartzman's gift again?
23 million? 25 million?
No, what year?
That was
The
recently.
2018. Yeah.
5 years.
Oh.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Karen.
That does.
So next up would be facilities. Mr. Azar?
Well, we spent about 2.5 hours last week in the facilities committee meeting. We went through a whole bunch of topics. So today's a work session. I'm hopeful we can sort of jump into a lot of these topics with the board and hear everybody's view. I know that, you know, there's 4 people on that facilities committee. I know everybody on the board, if they were asked, would probably say yes to serve on that committee. It's something that we've all been talking about. I want to thank Dr. Acker for asking me to chair the committee, and Dr. Acker. Yeah,
Mr. Secretary.
you could do that.
I appreciate that.
And so we covered a lot of topics, and I think it's important to review them at a high level, but I hope that we can jump in and talk as a board, because we really haven't, as a board, done a whole lot other than gather data and listen for the last 1.5 years, which is what we should have done, right? We hired some very, very experienced consultants to gather information and gather data to try to help us make decisions. And you know, the time is really now, since we've gathered the information, for us to start to digest that publicly and talk about publicly what we all think. And I think it's really important as we go through this that we all need to listen. We all need to listen to each other, because we don't individually have any answers. We're going to have our own views, but it's really important as we start to deliberate, we start to talk about this, that we try to stay as open-minded as we possibly can. The first question that we led with in that meeting last week was a simple one, but I don't want to take it for granted because it's a big deal. And that is, do you, as a board member, want to pursue either a brand new middle school or a very, very heavy renovation of middle school? And it was a very, very easy 4-0 vote on the committee to want to do that. I can tell you that when I got on the board 3.5 years ago, everybody was talking about one thing, COVID. It wasn't really a topic of discussion. And I don't think that you can take for granted that that's always going to be the view of whoever's on this board, but at the committee level, we certainly felt that way. And, you know, we certainly don't have to chime in as a board today if you're not comfortable doing that, but I'm hopeful that other board members could share their thoughts on that. A second question that we covered was the topic of, do we put all our eggs in one basket if we only have so many eggs, right? And so to the point of the capacity that we have to spend and invest funds into facilities, if it's limited, and it is, If somebody said to you, you could build a brand new middle school right now, right? Not in stages, not a renovation. Would you want to do that if it meant not doing, this is what was posted to the committee. Would you want to do that if it meant not doing projects at the other 5 schools? Because there's a lot. I mean, if you read that report from KCBA, which we all have, we have a lot of needs. And certainly at the committee level, the vote was unanimous that no, we did not want to put all of our eggs in that one basket. That may not be the view of other board members, but that's what we discussed last week. We think it's important to address needs at all of our buildings. And that limits us, unless we pursue a referendum for a really big number, we're certainly limited in what we can do. The other topics that we discussed that I'll mention, we did review the 4 KCBA middle school options in pretty good detail again. I don't know if you want to talk about those, Dr. Schaefer, at a high level, or if you want me to just go through.
Yeah, I'll briefly talk about those. They're mentioned in an article in the Times today, but through various feedback cycles that the board has provided and feedback from our public, our community members in our surveys, and also when we visited all the schools to talk about the facility study. We asked for essentially the minimum, which was a $39 million addition at the middle school, what we would call stage 1. This would allow 2 grades, admin, and a library, and a gymnasium. KCBA framed this as stage 1 because it would provide the board with the most opportunities going forward, meaning you could immediately build the second half and you would have a whole new middle school. Or you could decide to deeply renovate the other side. Or you could decide to slightly renovate and come back. But this gave you the most opportunity for decisions in the future versus the next option, which was 80, I'll call it 1 million, but it could be 85. And that would be the addition, 81, right? The addition for 2 classes, the admin, a library, and then a deep renovation, an extensive renovation of the remainder of the building, which we talked about the challenges of that, because it meant that students would have to be learning around construction during a deep renovation, or you would have to come up with another type of modular solution, meaning module learning spaces somewhere on the property. So you got 39, you got 81, then we got to $111 million option, which is the construction of a brand new middle school, grades 5 to 8, to the right of the existing middle school. You would build a brand new 5-8. Students would walk across, it wouldn't be a field, a really big parking lot, to a new school, and then the old would be demolished. Okay. Then the final was a $142 million new middle school, same spot as I just described, but this would be grades 4 through 8. Okay. So those were the 4 options.
So we reviewed those 4, in similar detail, even more detail last week. And I will say that unanimously, all 4 board members, we had already talked about wanting to do something, and we all agreed. And I want to thank Ms. Hillebrand and Mr. Moran for joining the facilities committee. It was a fire hose, as we said last week, of information for you guys, because you're both new on the board, and you've done a great job getting up to speed. You can tell that you guys have read the report, have watched meetings, and we had a very productive meeting, along with Mr. Abdallah, who's been talking about facilities since he's been on the board. A few years ago. It's been his passion for sure. So we went through all 4 of those options, and I will say that everyone agreed that money not being an issue, which obviously it is, we all agree it's not a hard thing to agree on. The optimal solution is to build a brand new middle school next to the existing one. It eliminates the need for temporary schooling and the mess that creates. You have a brand new building, not a half new building. But the issue that we're faced with is that the cost estimates from KCBA for those two scenarios, whether it's a 5 through 8 or a 4 through 8 brand new school, if you do that right now, those cost estimates seem to be in excess of what our budget will stand, even if we raise local effort taxes at the full index for several years. So that would mean that if you wanted to pursue one of those two options, that we would have to go down the road of a referendum. So just to be clear, the committee further, and I'll jump ahead, the committee further discussed later in the meeting its appetite today, understanding we're not making these decisions today, but we're just starting to talk about it. But the committee did unanimously say that we did not think that it was prudent to pursue a referendum if we had to vote that day. Now, we're going to listen to the community. We're going to talk to each other over the next several weeks. But I wanted to share that initial view, and that there's several reasons that I'll get into why we had that view as a committee. But everybody wants that. I think the people in the community want that. It's just trying to get that financially is a big challenge. So we went into a discussion. I tried to put together a decision tree for the board to consider. And we can go through it today if people would like to talk about it, but it's a ton of information that we're all digesting and trying to react to and trying to make decisions on. And it can become overwhelming really fast. So I tried on one page, not to help people make a decision, or to convince people which decision to make rather, but to try and help people look at data, look at our 4 options that KCBA has laid out, which, oh, by the way, that doesn't have to be the only universe that we look at, but it's the world that we've been looking at for the last 18 months. It's intended, and I hope everyone would look at it, take it home today and digest it, and then we can continue talking about it. But it's intended to say, okay, if you want this, then that. If you want this, then that. And anybody that has a view that they want to go for the full 4 through 8 middle school now, you can see on the decision tree what that means and how do you get there. And if you want to do a different path, there are parts of that diagram that help you show what's necessary to get to that decision. But they're all rooted in getting to one of those 4 end goals, whether it's a brand new 4 to 8, a brand new 5 to 8, the 2 new classes and a heavy renovation, or the 2 new classes today, and then finish at some point in the future, somewhere down the road, if and when that's available. So Dr. Shaver's going to put it up on the screen and we can look at it. We also discussed, and we discussed it again in the last hour with the financial consultants that came today, the possibility of a capital campaign, what kind of private capital has been raised in the past. And KCBA last week, as well as PNC and PFM today, both said that there's examples out there of money that's raised, but it's not big, and it's not for schools typically, other than that one example that I mentioned. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't try it, right? I mean, hey, maybe there's a billionaire that's an Abington Heights graduate that wants a middle school named after her or him. That'd be great. We should try it. We should absolutely try it. But I don't think it's prudent, and this is just me speaking right now. That can't be what you plan for, but you can certainly go after it. And then if you find it, guess what? Now you have to do you find a $30 million donor, you need $30 million less in bond financing. So we certainly should try that. But I think that for some of our other facilities needs, and we talked about this last week, a capital campaign is a real possibility for us. It's something that we should pursue. We've all talked about the possibility of doing something there to try and raise money for mostly for a new an auditorium that's very dated. Everybody knows it needs a ton of updating. And so that's the type of projects I think that the private capital would be. So this is that decision tree that I talked about. So if you look at the four orange, well, not orange, light brown, I guess, boxes, those are the four KCBA projects that if that's the universe of what we're looking at. And like I said, that doesn't have to be the whole universe, but that's what we've looked at so far. If you start at the top, the initial question, which is the one I started with last week, do you want a new and/or heavily renovated middle school? The answer to that is either yes or no, or I don't know. Right? If the answer is yes or no, if it's yes, then we go down through the decision tree. If it's no, and oh, by the way, for a long time, up until a few years ago, when 2 years ago, when we really started talking about that's what happened. You know, pursue minor. If the answer is no, you pursue minor renovations, repairs as needed, and you don't invest substantially in the middle school. You say it's fine the way it is, and you can have that view. And if you do, you can stop pretty much right there. But if you want to pursue something significant, there's a lot of things that you have to do to get there. And so the biggest questions are, do you want it to be 4 through 8 or 5 through 8? Do you want it to be all at once right now, or are you comfortable and okay with it happening in stages? The yellow boxes are the scenarios that would require a referendum, and they both lead to those two scenarios where it's a brand new school now. Something could change in our budget. Maybe the 111 becomes affordable. Maybe in the next month or two, you could get there. But as of right now, it looks like the numbers are saying that those are both potential referendums. So go ahead, Mr.
Mr. Azar, can you talk a little bit about what a referendum is?
Yeah, sure.
So everyone understands what
Yep.
that would mean if we did that?
Yeah. So one was just attempted yesterday in Ms. Henderson's alma mater, I believe, right? So North Penn, and it did not pass. But just for the public's benefit, I think most of the board knows this in spades at this point. But a public referendum is required if you want to raise taxes at higher than what the Act 1 index allows, and you want to have it be for a specific purpose. And then you put that to a vote, either in one of the two normal elections, general election or primary election, where you hold a special election like North Penn did yesterday. And the voters come out, and if you get more than 50% of the people to vote yes, and the referendum literally on the ballot will say something as simple as, do you support raising $140 million for a brand new, it doesn't say brand new, for a new middle school, for the construction of a new middle school? Yes or no? It's as simple as that. What happens in the lead up to that election in the past, there's only been 2 successful referendums in the state, State College in Upper Dublin, and there haven't been many attempted. But those are very big campaigns, not necessarily by us, because we can't advocate for it as board members, but the community on both sides is going to put tons and tons of effort in trying to get it to pass, and tons of effort in opposing it, and it's going to be a battle. And history's going to get. And time, yeah, it would take 18 months potentially. If we decided today that we wanted to do it, you're probably looking at, primary of 25 to do that. The reason why, and I'll speak for myself, but we did talk about this last week, that the committee did not want to pursue the referendum was, I'll just go through my notes, the lost time if you're unsuccessful. So now the last 2 years are hopefully not going to be the next 2 years, but the construction costs have skyrocketed with inflation in the last 2 years, over 20% per year. So even if they go back to normal inflation rates, they're still higher in 18 months than they are today. So there's a cost to waiting. If it fails, and we have to go back to where we are right now and do what we can without a referendum, now you're going to lose time, and time is money. There's only been 2 successful state referendums in state history. North Penn, again, failed yesterday. North Penn was 58% no. Their referendum, I believe, was for just under $100 million, and it was to add 9th grade to the high school. So they're going to pursue other projects, very significant other projects, with their normal budget now, that hasn't passed. But if that passed, they were going to issue $100 million of bonds specifically for the 9th grade inclusion into that project for whatever the term of the bonds, 20 or 30 years would be. That did not pass, so they didn't pursue it. The other reasons that are concerning is that if you pursue a referendum to the community, you can see on the chart, and these are in red for a reason, but under the scenario where you say yes, I want a new school, I want 4 through 8, right? 4 through 8 has benefits, could create space down the road for growth if population increases, if we add all-day kindergarten. It gives you more flexibility. So let's say you want that. And are you willing to pursue it in 2 stages? Build half of it today? No, I want it all today. Okay. Well, if you want it all today, then you have to pursue a voter referendum for $142 million to build that school today. That would be an immediate 30-ish% tax increase for people in our district. Instead of it happening, it's difficult enough for a lot of people to have it happen over time. That's day one. You wake up the next day and it's 30% higher. Complicating matters is that we're in the process of a Lackawanna County reassessment, and a very large number of people in our community are going to have a higher tax bill when that's over. People are also going to have a lower tax bill. Some people's taxes are going to go down, but there's a number of people that are going to get hit twice if there was a referendum followed by that reassessment. The dynamics of doing a referendum also make it very difficult to do other projects unless you do a $200 million referendum. We're not going to have significant funds left for other buildings. We would be putting all of our eggs in that middle school basket. And we still would have, this is an important point, and Dr. Schaefer mentioned this earlier tonight in our finance committee meeting, you still would have to raise taxes to cover our operating budget. You have to raise taxes every few years. Unfortunately, unless the state changes how school districts are funded, there's no way around inflation, and 75% of our costs are staff and teacher contracts that have a glide path of increasing over time. You have to keep up with that. So it's not like you're not going to raise taxes for 30 years if you do a referendum. You're going to still raise taxes. So open for obvious discussion at this level. But we did talk about it, and based on all those factors, we didn't think that it was a prudent thing to pursue. So those are the big picture stuff that we did go through last week to sort of get the ball rolling.
Dr. Schaefer?
I was just about to say, I think that's a great opportunity to talk and have an open discussion about where.
A couple things about tonight. We're not here tonight to make any decisions. We're here to have input, and discussion, and share ideas. We hope to hear what people that are here tonight, and thank you very much for coming, have to say, and what your views are. But the idea is, again, to communicate, make sure that when we get to that point where we're making decisions, the largest number of people within the community understand what it is we're going to do. So you had some comments?
I just have a few comments before I turn it over, because again, as Mr. Acker said, this is informal. This is a work session. Think of it almost as a committee as a whole where we have this discussion. We have it in public. Maggie, if you had can you flip to my quick presentation where I'm just going to, I'm gonna post this so everybody has the opportunity to take a look at it in more detail. I don't want to go through it all. You can go to the next slide here. I have to start off with a little Shakespeare from the Tempest. What's past is prologue, and oftentimes our past sets the context or informs our future. And while I'm not going to read this, I can tell you that Abington Heights, in all sorts of different configurations, has been in the education business for over 193 years. I have these T-shirts that I had made that I wear around the community on the weekends. And this past weekend, I had a long sleeve that said the Hog Pen Schoolhouse in Newton. That dates back to 1834. Our schoolhouses started in the Abingtons as they were community centers and hubs for entertainment and also worship. And in this case, they closed the door after school, and some hogs got in, And by wind or the hogs, they closed that. And the next thing you know, there was, I guess you maybe call it a litter of hogettes. And from that point on, Newton, they call it the hog pen schoolhouse. So I say this because the past is prologue. It was a part of the fabric of Abington Heights 193 years ago, and it is now. We hold the same values about educating our students. Go to the next slide. We're going to actually go to the next slide after that. So what you'll have posted on the website that you can take a look at is the board has been very strategic, deliberate, and methodical over the last year and a half in getting to this stage. And what I have is a very detailed timeline from a request for proposals that started in the beginning of 2022. We had a facilities committee that interviewed several architects, called references. We took a look at who do we want to support and assist us that are experts. We have a bond council. We have representatives from PNC and PFM. We have municipal financial advisors, a bond counselor, Mr. Payne from PNC, and they're all here to make sure that we're doing right by our community, making sure that we are following best practices. It's their job. We joked in the facilities, or the finance committee meeting, is they think about those worst case scenarios, right, and provide us the guidance. So this has been very deliberate, and we will continue to seek feedback from the public as we're attempting to today. We do that through surveys. Dr. Vitale posted, we put surveys together the last 2 years, over 7,700 respondents, including students and parents and community members. And we've gathered that. And that's why we started talking about the middle school. Because by far and away, from that data point, the feedback that we get from our community members is the middle school was priority. And the same thing from the survey. So this reinforces that. And you can take that down. That's all I had.
That's it?
That is it. So I just wanted that.
Can you actually put Rod's or Mr. Gazer's presentation back up?
So at this point, do we want to have any public comment to start with, and then the board can provide comment from the board? So if someone in the public would like to share their thoughts, we would welcome it, or if you have questions or whatever. None? Okay, then in that case, let's open up to the board comments, and what, Mrs. Henderson.
I think we need to, Rod, Mr. Gazer gave a very good presentation on what the facilities committee discussed, but I do think we need to go up to the, I think it's page 4, to talk about, because if you listen, we had 90 million was our max capacity conservatively to borrow, right? So with a conservative, yes, without a referendum, 90 million was our number, right? We talked about that. And well, I think it matters only because on the decision tree, we have 111 million for a brand new middle school, which is really desirable, I'll be honest. But then I have a 39 million. So what's that gap look like, right? So do you want to actually speak to this?
Yeah, so this is draft. This is KCBA is working on. They've started to give us some cost estimates, but these are in no way, shape, or form bids by any stretch. But KCBA still has to opine on a lot of these numbers, but they're directional. And what we try to do is put other projects into some major categories. And you could break these 10 major categories into smaller projects. This doesn't have to happen in this order, but it really gives you an illustration of, yes, we have a big middle school need. Everybody that I've heard, that I've talked to on the board and also in the community, people know that the middle schools are our biggest glaring issue. But we have a lot of other ones. And it's not to say that this stuff all has to happen today, because it won't. But if you look at this list, we do have significant needs in all of our other buildings. whether it's, and some of this is upgrades and additions, like the STEM project at the high school. A lot of school districts are adding more STEM spaces, and, you know, that's one of the top recommendations from KCBA. If we asked them, what are your next couple of projects? And the two that they highlighted quickly was the STEM project at the high school. We pursued that, and the not just air conditioning, but air circulation. We lack air circulation in most of our buildings, and so those are very expensive projects. And then the other ones that are listed here, HVAC systems are all near the end of their useful life in all of our buildings. The buildings haven't been renovated substantially in many years, just basic renovations. LED lighting, you know, there's a lot of other potential projects for us to consider. So open question for the board. This was what we spent a lot of time on this page because we were trying to discuss security is another big issue. You know, we spent a lot of time trying to grapple with that question. Do you put all your eggs in the middle school, or do we need to do other stuff? And that's why this page was helpful to discuss.
And to frame that, to add just onto that briefly, one of the things that we also discussed in facilities, and I'd like to emphasize this, one is the district did a lot of work in renovation in the mid-90s. Newton Ransom was opened in 96. The high school, there was an addition put on. We did other renovations. And it's hard to believe, but we're going to be coming up on 30 years for all of that work, the time where the mechanicals are going down and whatnot. So that's something that we talked about when Rod had mentioned eggs, if you're putting all your eggs in one basket or multiple baskets. So we have the opportunity to talk about that, and we'll come back to it.
Yeah, okay. Mrs. Henderson, I think was next, and then Mrs. Tierney.
So just to get a clear expectation in terms of expenses, the $142 million for new 4-8 middle school, that's just for the physical building, correct? Because I know that, you know, there's a lot of talk about wanting full-day kindergarten. So presumably the point of doing a 4-8 building would be to move fourth grade up to allow more space to have a full-day kindergarten. So do we have any idea what that number looks like? Because we're like, oh, 142 million is a bigger number, much bigger number than the other builds. But I think with that, we're accruing a lot more expense because we would need, you know, more kindergarten teachers, presumably more support staff in the middle school. Do we have like a ballpark number of, because it's not just 142 million, it's all of that compounded.
And if you do work on other schools, it's more than that. I mean, if you say we have to do something in these other schools.
I think a reason, I mean, don't hold me to the exact number, but when these ultimately become easier estimates, in that I believe that number would be somewhere between 15 to 17, given new teachers. So that's a significant. That's, you know, you'd be looking at about $1.7 million initial investment that then goes up. And I remembered what I forgot, and someone asked me, like, Chris, why do the elementary numbers up there vary so much? And when we take a look at estimates and we work with our architects, a lot is based on square footage. So I pick out numbers. We know what the recommendations are per square foot per student. We also look at industry standards the architects do for, like, air conditioning. And the first thing anybody ever says to me is like, why is Clark Summit so much? I said, well, remember, Clark Summit was a high school. They have a tremendous amount of square footage. In fact, when you go in there, it's a high school auditorium, a high school gymnasium. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that. We take a look at square footage. So that's why you start to see all that. And that's why you would see a number like $20 million for air conditioning at the high school. Put in air conditioning and it won't look any different than it does now. But that's, just so you know, that's what it's based on. That's
Mrs. Tierney.
Yeah, a couple questions on this page. Is this your order of prioritizing?
No, not at all.
This was just
No,
a
this
list.
is just a list.
Raw
Okay.
numbers
Yep.
literature.
Can you explain what number 7 is?
So that is, there's actually an updated one after that meeting, KCBA looked at this list. So fire suppression in KCBA's, one of the initial slides that they recently sent us, at Waverly, was a separate line item, but it's not only proposed to be done at Waverly. I mean, I'm not as fluent on the existing systems in the other schools, but that's simply, sprinkler systems at Waverly. That's what-
Sprinkler systems.
Oh,
It's proposed in South Africa as well, I believe.
Yeah, it's in the
yeah,
renovation,
and the
it's in their
last
light
page is
renovation numbers
yeah.
for the other schools. So
Yeah.
like, that's where KCBA didn't have their numbers organized in categories where when we think about projects, we look at it maybe differently than KCBA is looking at it just these are all the projects. For us to consider, we have to figure out which projects we would want to pursue and when we want to pursue them. And there has to be some groupings that are done, which just isn't, that work isn't done yet. We have to talk about what the best way to group.
So
These
you're saying that
projects
that's
is-
sprinklers, so is that a insurance issue? Is that something that is out of compliance?
No, because
No.
it's only if you build a new school. Same with
Oh.
there's no duct work at South Ave, right? There's no duct work at Waverly. There's no, if you build a brand new school today, you have to put, and I asked that question last week.
Okay, yeah,
I said, how many schools that are built today have air conditioning? He said 100%. Not necessarily air conditioning, but they have the duct work so they can circulate the air. It's a code requirement today. But if you have a school, there's tons of schools that don't have it.
And there are state regulations for how many times you exchange air within a classroom or within a school.
So if you're gonna build a new one, you have to meet those standards.
you have
Just
to meet
drop
all
down.
those standards. Okay, so then I have one other question. On the extracurricular, I know that at one point we discussed purchasing for the swimming pool area, the safety issues of the broken starting blocks. And is that included in this, or have we already ordered those?
They're already actually getting put in, I think, next week or right now.
Perfect, 'cause I've gotten a few.
Those were part of the capital project that
That's
you
what I thought,
approved. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
okay.
So,
So
Yeah,
that's
but-
not inclusive? of
No.
that?
No, and
Okay.
I listed those on the bottom there, because, in various discussions that we've had, prior to tonight and last week, we've talked about extracurricular projects, capital campaign. Not to say that, the capital campaign could pay for all of those things underneath that list, because you're not gonna raise that, unless you just break new ground, you're not gonna raise that much money. But those are the types of project, a new auditorium, naming rights for the auditorium, or for something like that's where the capital campaign, at least from what I can tell, is the most likely place to raise funds for. But if you look at all the things on that list, if anybody's taking a walk through the swimming pool area or the gym or the auditorium, they're very, 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 very in need of renovations. Go walk through the lockers, the basketball lockers in the high school gym. It's a major issue.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the.
Mr. Pella.
So, the one thing on there that's not negotiable is the ADA. I mean, the fact that we're
Yeah.
not ADA compatible is like a disgrace.
Yeah, you have to.
So,
There's no grandfather.
Like, if we were going to list stuff and.
Yeah, that's
or-
absolutely
and
high
that
on
would
the
have
list. Absolutely high on.
And security, in my opinion, is in the same category.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How can you do work in these schools and not make sure that the entrances are secure?
Mhm.
And not that they're not now, but I mean, a higher level.
Because we're not, I mean, there's no such thing as grandfather, ADA is 35 years old. I think we rode that horse.
And there's so many things that are interconnected here. When you look, for instance, on the extracurricular stadium completion, stadium completion would allow you to have all your football games in high school. That then gives you more flexibility what you can do with the Park Green property. So if you can think about doing something, you have to do that. And these are all things in the mix. Mr. Chairman?
It's not that I have a question, but the facilities committee came up with this prioritization worksheet. I think this is a really nice tool for all of us to
Yeah, I
kind of
mentioned that, yeah.
prioritize and give a little,
Yep.
sense
So
of.
I'll mention that now that you brought it up. So I went through this as quickly as I could. It was 2.5 hours of awesomeness last weekend, in my opinion. But, because we've all wanted to talk about this, right? And now we're finally doing it. It's great. Some people probably didn't think it was awesome because it was so long. Page 6, this is a draft that I think that, and I think that we have to listen to the community over the next several weeks a lot, because that's going to help us zero in on what we would prioritize. Everybody on the board has a view of what would be first and what would be last. And at some point, we shouldn't do it today, but at some point, and this isn't the worksheet that'll be the final one if we decide to do this, but at some point, I think it would be really helpful, because I don't know what everybody would rank, and everybody's going to have a different ranking. So I think that, this is a productive tool for us to consider using.
Rod did a very good job of looking at this, because I will tell you the tricky part is there are some questions about one of the documents, is because when you take a look, when KCBA provides something to us, I want to look at it like it's an a la carte menu. But then when I talk to the architect, they're like, no, look, when we go in and we do this, we do that fire suppression, we do this thing.
No line item data.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that you look at that. But we did speak with Mike about this, and he framed it in a way that made sense to me when I was asking about, tell me about high renovations, low renovations. What, when you come up with working on an elementary school and it's $7 million, what does that mean to a layperson? He said, Chris, it's like the walls remain. We take out the carpet, we put in new flooring, there's new lights, there's new painting, there's new tiles. It's not air conditioning because that's pretty evasive, because as Rod mentioned, there's no ducts and piping and air exchange. There's so much work that needs to be done. But he gave us a really good picture of what that refresh would look like. And so when we start to get to that point, I think that's when you start to have some of these really detailed conversations about what goes into it. What does that really look like? How much does that change?
Mrs. Chair.
I don't mean to keep asking questions, but I'm going back to the number 4 of the stage 1 and then the stage 2 project. Is that common for projects like this to do a big, huge building in 2 stages? Or is
So
this
we asked
more?
KCBA that KCBA last week. I don't know if common's the right word, but it's certainly not unique. I mean, we're sitting in a building that's been built over many renovations, right? Like 20 years ago, they added the back of the building. So is it optimal? No, it's not optimal. The optimal is a brand new building now, definitely optimal. But it's, that's a very challenging.
Given the constraints we have financially, I think prudence says we have to provide the most amount of flexibility we have going forward down the road. You and I don't know where people are, but let's say you do a stage on the middle school. Well, when you get down the road, you may find, okay, interest rates have changed. The state has suddenly changed the way they're funding. PlanCon comes through. All these things, hopefully we will be in a position that we'll be able to pivot to take advantage of those things. Or, maybe that white knight that we keep hearing about appears. We can pivot then and finish that project. We can do these other things. I think it's going to be a situation where we're going to have to break these down into finite groups of work and prioritize them in the way that we think is most important. Mr. Abdullah mentioned ADA, security, other things so it's going to be, this is not going to be an easy process.
So if I could follow up I just want to follow up because it's directly related to what you said. So the scenario on the diagram, the $39 million, the 2-stage one, right? Just so that everybody, because we talked about this a lot last week. If we go down that path, if you're going to pursue the 81 million, which is the heavy renovation of the half circle at 2 grades, you have to do the 39 million first. So that's how KCBA recommends doing the 81, right? Is essentially do the $39 million project, and then in 2.5 years or whenever that one's done, then you do the heavy renovation. right? It's not done at the same time. So if you chose to go down the path of that 39, you don't even have to make the decision there. You maintain the flexibility all throughout that construction of those two grades to either pull the trigger and heavily renovate the half circle and do the 81 scenario, or like Mr. Acker said, you then might be in a position to build the second half. You found a private donor. The budget projections might show, hey, we actually can build 2 more brand new grades or 3 more brand new grades and bulldoze. You maintain that flexibility all throughout the construction of that first phase. So if you go down those 2 paths, you have flexibility.
I just want to say that I found this page to be particularly helpful. I think anybody on the committee or even on the board would say, we would love to build a brand new school. If I had all the money in the world and a magic wand, that's what would happen today. But as we go through it, we say, why did we go down that path in the first place? We have safety concerns. We have educational environment concerns with the school. And I think we also have an obligation to do the most good for the most students, even outside of the middle school. So I think this helped me kind of put that into perspective and to understand how do we paint with a bigger brush throughout the entire community instead of focusing on one much.
My view is as board members, we have 2 masters here. One is the constituents that elected us and making sure we use the public's money in the wisest, most careful fashion. But the second and more important is our students. So we need to do everything we can for our students, recognizing our obligation to our constituents as well. This is not going to be perfect. We're going to do something wrong here, but we're going to try to do the very best we can in the most reasonable way. Go ahead.
My role is always to be like the devil advocate that we honor the situation, right? So with that sunshine and roses preface, one thing that is not, we talked last week, and Mr. Moran made a very good point, which was that in this scenario, we do the most good for the most students, right? And I think that's wonderful. And we spread our resources more evenly. We are, though, by pursuing a stage 1 middle school scenario, we will free up space. There's a lot of good things that will happen for the other 2 that are grades that are staying in that half circle, but they will not receive the benefits of this plan. And so that is something that I think we do owe some conversation around. And I do think that we can also reach out to the community more in that scenario and say, here's our priority list. It's our must, wants, wishes list, right? If we had all the money in the world, this is our wish. And our community might come back to us and say, you know what, we're willing to help you raise these resources, or we're willing to support you in this endeavor. We do have staggered borrowing. We talked about that in the finance committee. I'm not sure that I included that in my report, but there is an option if we have a lot go our way. Again, this is being very optimistic, that we could eventually bring us closer to that $81 million number while still being able to do some of these other projects. I don't think it's wishful thinking, but it is very positive thinking. So I do want to throw that out there because I do think it's important for the public to understand, this is not necessarily, again, the optimal option from a contractor position or a construction position is to do this now. But we are going to not have that circle.
I would just say that there's also, these are 4 options, but there is a possibility to be creative with that as well. So if we say it's 31 million for half of the school and we don't touch the circle, we can say we do moderate renovations, like not heavy renovations, but we can reconfigure the structure of the classrooms or whatever it may be to have the best possible outcome with the least impact on the physical building. So we could get to the point that we say maybe it's 45 million.
I think this project really is a project of stages. Everyone wants to replace the middle school in some fashion. And I think the answer is we're going to do it in stages. Stage 1 is this plus, as you said, making sure we do the best good for most people. And then stage 2 is, okay, let's figure out how we're going to complete the project. This is Henderson.
I know when we're saying, half the school, if you have two grades get the new building and the other two don't. You also have to look at the upside of just removing half of the students, like the sheer volume of students is going to be half. So there's going to be, whereas Dr. Schaefer always say unintended consequences. There's still going to be an upside of not having, 11 or 1,200 kids in that one piece of the building. So I do think, while they're not going to have the shiny new building, I do think it's, just allowing for more physical space, going back to that per, square footage per student.
So
I think
Mike
would be huge.
from KCBA last week mentioned that they said for the middle school, from a square foot per student, so I should be the same size as high school. It needs, was it another 50,000 square feet we talked about? And it's to your point. It's a drop off.
Correct me if I'm wrong, didn't KCBA also say that that's Pandora's box? You start touching walls in that disaster
Yeah.
circle.
Yeah, you don't know,
I mean, 81 could be 110.
there's more significant, we talked about project risk that our advisors in the hour before the meeting in finance committee, right? The project risk of renovating that half circle is much higher than the project risk of a brand new building. There's no doubt. You don't know what you're going to uncover when you start to.
Yeah.
And aside from Pandora's box, it is also a need. Like that building will need to be. I mean, that if you do the KCBA study, if the first facilities leader where we had our index scores, I mean, that building will need. So it's not something, we are kind of thinking the hand on the road. We're going to need to do something.
I think that if you look at the four options, right, the $81 million option, I don't think, based on what I heard, that we have to decide that one today. That's sort of like that is one of the paths that you could pursue if you decide to do the stage one. Stage one could either lead to a heavy renovation of the half circle, or stage one could lead to stage two, which is construction of 2 or 3 additional new grades and a bulldozer, which is what everybody wants, if we can find one. But you have that flexibility, right? If you get to 2 years from now and you're like, it's just not possible, we can't build 3 more grades or 2 more grades that are brand new, and we want to do something, we still have that flexibility. The decision that we're all going to be faced with here very quickly is referendum reopening. That's really, because if you decide you want to do it now, it looks like, based on what we're hearing, that the 111 is probably out of reach and 142 is almost certainly out of reach without a referendum. So if you want to pursue those two, we would have to decide to do that.
Can we talk about that? Because I'm not so sure I know where everybody is at with that.
I think we're better off on others if we can get a referendum.
So, I mean,
Yeah, we talked about.
I know that this is more of a direct question, but a lot goes into it. Is there,
Sure.
we're not voting here today, but to say like who's for what?
My thoughts tonight are going in stages. I can't see us doing anything immediate as far as starting over, doing new, brand new. I think the most prudent decision would be for us to do stages of specifically the middle school. I have other concerns, more of the whole community. I know our study came out and said that South Abington Elementary is in a flood zone. We all have experienced much more flooding. So are we going to have South Abington Elementary in 10 years? So that's K through 4, half-time K through 4 students. So I think we have to really keep a wider lens of both what we need and what we can afford. So,
I think that directly answer your question, I would be opposed to a referendum at this point, because it's kind of right now everybody's getting beat up by the economy, right? And we don't anticipate that to change. We expect some people to see us really impacted by the rezoning or whatever throughout the community. And I don't think that we can't solve some of our most significant problems without it. I also think that the time between now and the end of the referendum, should have passed, is going to cost us a significant amount of money. I also think we kind of have an obligation to do as much good in our term that we were elected for. I think our community wants action now. That's what we hear. So I think it'd be silly to delay. We just add additional risk to that.
Yeah, I think it's a hard pill to swallow to say we would invest all this time and money and put 18 months worth of work in and have it fail. I mean, I just don't see, I'm optimistic. I would hope it would pass, but I really don't see it. And I think just putting a 20 or 30% tax burden on the community would just be really difficult for a lot of people. So I would not be in favor of doing a referendum at this point.
I would not be in favor of a referendum for a lot of the reasons we discussed at the committee meeting in detail. Mr. Beaver covering this, but not to minimize what he said from the onset, but I think the countywide reassessment is a big factor, how that will play out. So many properties will be affected with already a rise in their tax level, and then have a 30%. And oftentimes, as Mr. Azar said, you think, well, it's 30% increase, but then it's on top of the necessary increases that will have to follow trend, because part of the district, why this district is so good, is maintaining the teacher salaries, and that's 75% plus of the budget. So you have to stay in line with that.
You don't mind. It's a waste of time.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'll take a different view on this. I don't think it's a waste of time because that, the question at hand in the referendum is going to be for the big new school. So that doesn't mean we don't have to spend anything over that year. So that assumption is just false. We can make moderate safety improvements right now today. And in the spirit of letting the people choose and decide if that's what they really want, instead of a group of 9 people who are elected, right? But if we're going to make bold transformational change, we should allow the public to weigh in. And we talked about this a couple of years ago, and we were thinking the referendum would be this year. So, we're not waiting a year, but having it in a year from now does not negatively impact doing some of the things we need to do safety-wise. Just not touching the $500,000, obviously. So, it is not a waste of time.
I'll figure that. I don't think now is the right time for a referendum, but I will not say that there's never one. I think that this is something, to that point, I think that I expect when we start these projects, we will receive more feedback. And I expect there will be concerns about the middle school that come forward as we raise taxes. Remember, the Aquin Index is put into place so that we do not, as 9 elected members, right, put an undue burden on our taxpayers. If we move forward with these projects, and I'm not saying 18 months from now, I think that's a little too soon. I would like to see us move forward on these projects. But if in 2 years we say, we do want that, economic outlook has changed, the assessment, which is something that, has been spoken about, right, for a while now, say that happens or doesn't happen, right, things might change. So I'm not in favor of a referendum tomorrow, but not now.
I just want to seek clarification because I think that I may somewhat agree with what you're saying. In that if we get to the point that we start the projects and say we go at stage 1, and we get to the point that we say we don't see stage 2 as a potentially viable thing without a referendum, we have already committed to the improvements that serve the broader good, and we need a way to get to stage 2, and that's what's being relayed to us by the community. And there may be an opportunity for a referendum in the future to support the completion of the mission. I would agree with that.
So Dr. Shaper, you're asking like today, right? Like if we had to, right now. Yeah.
But if in stage 2 that fails, we still follow the decision tree, right? We still are doing what we want to do, so that's the only reason I don't want to completely take it off.
Right, and I just want to, and I've said this before, and I want to just say it again because it never gets old, is when we're talking about any type of project like we're talking about right now, so let's just say stage one, because everything would start with stage one. We can't build everything simultaneously, right? That's 1 year of design and build, followed by at least 2 years of building, right? And depending on when you initiate this project, we got to deal with winter here. So you're either adding 6 months on your time, but you just be cognizant of it. Like if you approve something in November, right, and it's a long time, like 1 year design and build, there are some contractors that won't want to go up to northeastern Pennsylvania in January and put a hoe in the ground, right? So just so you know, that's when we talk about time, just understand that the context could change just in the design and bid phase.
And
And you heard PFM talk about that today when they said they came out and were speaking with us in November. Was that in I forget right now, 2022 or 3? Was it 23 you came out? But it was at the peak of the interest rate hike, right? And so things are a little different now, but we're not going to, speculate on interest rates. So.
and also school board directors are 4-year terms where, seats can rotate and decisions can change.
So, yeah, I won't repeat what I've already said, but it's pretty clear that I've said that I'm not in favor of pursuing that. But a couple of things that I would like to add to that is, so referendums in Pennsylvania are extremely uncommon, successful. There's only been 4. So school constructions in the last 15 years are not uncommon. There are many examples of school districts that have built brand new schools in the last 15 years, some in our own district, multiple ones in our own districts, without referendums. So while I would love to know the community's appetite for it, I really would. Like I'm a extremely open-minded lover of data, and I want to get as much of it as I can. And a referendum would certainly give you that, but I just don't think that it's. If you look at how the state works, it's just not the normal way to get projects done. It's just unless the state changes, which hopefully it will change some of the ways that the state gets things done. I just don't think it's the right path.
Well, again, I'm also not in favor of referendum at this point in time. I think Ms. Marine's comments are spot on. I'm a big believer in building flexibility and options down the road. I think we get going, we see what happens with the county reassessments, a whole host of things. We may be in a better position to finish a project under our own steam, or maybe we have to do a referendum at that point in time if we think that's the only option. I also think the whole idea of doing a fund drive for specific parts of that is something we need to consider. I also think that, to Mr. Rhodes' point, a referendum, yes, it delays, but what really happens at a referendum, that delay isn't a delay in the work you're doing until then. It's the increased cost you're going to incur on waiting a year to start the project. If the costs increase 20% a year and we decide to do a $142 million referendum, it's going to be a year or 18 months before that actually starts, which means that $142 million project is now 20% higher. It's going to cost you $28 million more for that project.
It's a different design.
Yeah.
If you pursue the referendum for 42, it's a completely different design.
I agree. But my point is, your increased cost, you have to factor in, you're thinking that increased cost will have this. So. Any other comments?
I have a question on a different way of obtaining revenue. You talked about capital campaigning.
Yeah.
Is there any Pennsylvania legislation that public entities have to, guidelines that we have to adhere to and follow if we were gonna do some type of a capital
Oh, yeah.
fund? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, so
There's lots of
would
regulations.
we have to
on
hire a
foundations.
consultant for that? What would that model look like? How would we go about doing that? Would we do that ourselves?
I think the first thing, we've talked about this already, is if you're raising money, the school district itself can't necessarily be the repository of the funds you raise. You have to have a foundation or 501c3 or someplace to act as collection. That's why we talk to the AEIO. What can they do? They have very specific requirements of what they can do with their money. So that's an issue, I think. And then I think it's a question of communicating to the community.
Is that a path, is that a direction that we want to go in? At the same time, we're doing all
Who
of these
knows?
other things, right?
It's an option,
It's-
and we need to keep that option open.
I think it's more than an option. It's a
Right?
discussion we're moving
Right?
forward
I
on.
absolutely think we should pursue
Okay,
that.
thank you.
We are
agree.
moving
I
forward
think we
on that, but I
should.
think.
Simultaneously with all.
Yeah.
It's another benefit of not doing I was gonna say, it's another benefit of not pursuing the referendum.
Right.
If you're gonna pursue a referendum over the next 12 to 18 months, you're not doing capital.
We can't.
It's two gigantic campaigns competing with it. You just can't do it. So if you decide not to do the referendum, it opens the door to do a massive, heavy marketed capital campaign, which we're not reinventing the wheel. Like, it's been done in other school districts in varying degrees of success, but it's typically, like Mr. Acker said, it's a separate entity. The school could help fund operationally some of those efforts, but the school's not raising the money.
Having worked in IA to institutional advancement, like a capital campaign requires a very long quiet stage where you may not be hearing about it because you have to do a lot of legwork and research on whether or not that is a viable option. Because a capital campaign is not your normal fundraising effort. That is a significant gifts, and we are talking more major money
For a specific thing, right?
for specific things. And there are, to your point about that money is not ours to spend freely on. I know there's a lot of regulations about like the shell of the building versus what's in it. So I think it's an important piece to that puzzle overall, but it is not what we are planning on. It is I think,
I just wanted to point out that if we got to the point that we said a future state referendum is an idea to support phase 2 of the project, that also means that assuming we do well during the first phase, there's a possibility that we're not asking for a referendum at 32%, we're going back and saying 12% or whatever it may be at that point. So it should end up being significantly smaller of an impact to the individual contributors.
That's an
I
excellent
could
point.
be wrong, but I think the PFM numbers basically state we will have tax increases for a certain, up to the Act 1 index for a certain number of years.
Right.
6 years, I think it was.
30.
So,
5 years.
But it is certainly possible at the end of that period of time, we may turn around and say, okay, we're gonna do more.
7 years of increase.
Seven.
But we may say, okay,
We make assumptions.
Yeah.
So I do want to make a point of clarification, and I went over to some of the consultants to make sure that my interpretation is accurate. So when we're talking about capital campaigns, in many instances that I have observed and read about, you see that on the the extracurricular side, okay? It would be very difficult, if not impossible, to set up the borrowing structures that we are talking about now, predicated upon donations. PFM, PNC, we're not going to be able to pull a bond if we say, well, we pledge that we're going to get $50 million from a capital campaign. I want to make sure
Okay.
we're clear on
Makes
that.
sense.
There can be some scenarios out there where the district the board would move forward. There is a campaign occurring, most likely and in most places through a foundation or 501c3, and funds generated that can be used during a rebate period to pay off debt service.
Or just downsize.
Or downsize, right? That would be the prudent way to do it that way. is probably more familiar with what you see is what we observe with some of our booster organizations. Let's raise some money and let's buy lane lines. Let's buy a clock. Let's buy turf fields. You know, those are things that you see. So I just wanted to make sure we clarified that.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of process though, and like what the next steps are we looking to find out what that magic number is? And then from that, determine what phase one looks like? Is that?
That would be, so the next, we set a, what I call a soft target. If we need more time, we need more information, so be it. But I set a soft target of March 20th, because that was the second board meeting. We have information that we learned today that's similar to what we had kind of gleaned before, that 90 million appeared to be that number based on those assumptions. And you're correct to assume that we would need to have discussions about projects. What are we?
But getting back to the 90 million, I heard that it was 100% borrowed.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, you know, I'm looking at some other new building construction, and there are some other sources that I don't know if we look at for what, like for a new building, new school, new renovations, whatever, raising capital. So local funding, obviously, there's also state funding,
What state?
federal, capital funds.
Actually, can I pause you?
We did.
Well, I can answer this question. We talked about this, building. So this budget forecast that our financial consultants gave us includes Mr. Mirabelli's estimates of what those numbers would look like moving forward. That's wrapped in. So assuming that there is, right, like a normal percentage increase on real estate revenues, or a normal percentage increase on state and federal funding based on what you've seen in the last 20 years, is giving you what you're projecting moving forward. Is that okay?
So, and then there's the, you know, potential public-private partnerships, bonds, of course, and then I'm just looking historically what other schools have done.
So,
and obviously.
Yeah, I will say that one, we've pursued state. I mean, if you're talking about RACB, that hasn't been announced. The Shapiro administration. I don't know of any recapitalization funds. Although I've talked to our legislators about if there's anything available, we're here. We'll put any application out for that. We do have earmarks currently, but there's been no recapitalization funds put in. I think it was $10 million for Abington Heights School District. That's been in there for a while. I will spend a second on the public-private partnership because I did ask about that. It's not explicitly illegal and it's not explicitly legal. Prince George's County has done that. I think there was one in Philadelphia, but I just want to level set on what that may look like. And David, Zach, you correct me if I'm wrong here. So as a for instance, or if I oversimplify this, a public-private partnership, we donate land to a contractor. We say, here are plans for a school. Build this. They build that, and then they sell it back to us. What we do, and when I say we, a public-private partnership, to be fair, what this is, we are required, when talking about projects like this, to pay prevailing wage. By doing this, you get away from prevailing wage and you save anywhere from 20 to 30%. Gentlemen, am I accurate on my description? This public-private partnership, we give it to a contractor to do it, they build it, and it's not what we want. So now we're in court for a really long time, and this is one of the reasons why, correct me if I'm wrong here, that we don't see the public-private.
You don't see those schools.
And they have been discussed, but they're normally discussed very early. The reality is, it's a mathematical way to get around the building.
But it hasn't been done.
Not to my knowledge.
Rich,
We're talking about it, but we've got to step two.
You should check with Mike Kelly. I mean, sometimes there is different
Yeah,
grants that you can apply for, based on if the building is going to be energy, meet some sort of energy efficiency requirement, and you can get, kind of different buckets of money. I mean, it's not going to build a school, but it would help if you borrow less money towards the end of the borrowing. It'll shrink how much you have to borrow.
But like 2 million, not 25 million.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a drop in the bucket.
It's a large community. I mean, we've got over 500 school districts, and between ourselves and our competitors and transparency of financing, there's not, unfortunately, there's not a lot of other blueprints out there outside of going and borrowing tax exempt bonds for large projects. And you'll go through that process with Act 72, where you have to present all of the options. They start with the very ridiculous, which is cash. Yeah, $110 billion in cash. No. And you step to the next one, the next one. And 9 times out of 10, you're looking at tax exempt bonds as the most efficient.
Yeah, that's your Act 34 hearing, which you'll have to go through as a public presentation before you can move forward. The big one that did exist that's missing now is PlanCon.
Right.
That one had material impact. You can get 10 cents, 20 cents, 30 cents on the dollar reimbursement from the state for eligible projects, but that's been in moratorium for 6 or 8 years and no signs of life support.
So everyone should call, say we want PlanCon.
But if it does come back, it's something you can always
In
pursue.
our phases, in our stages.
So we're not going to budget for that.
Right, and
So Dr.
Phil, I think I
Shaver-
was asking some of your, sorry. You mentioned some of those that are like, oh, that was a good comment because I asked about public-private partnership. And then RACB, I asked about RACB. PlanCon, I think I mentioned that, we're always talking about that. Correct me if I'm wrong here too, with PlanCon, essentially, this is a subsidy. What we got 10 to 20%. If, hypothetically, we can talk, I'm not going to make decisions based on that, but hypothetically, what we could do, like we could have done, I think, back in 2015, if PlanCon comes out, we put in our application and we do that, that's approved for a certain amount of time. We could have had PlanCon approved in 2015 for building that was going on in 2020. Right? And by working with KCBA and talking about stages, we have several things. So while it may not be in the hopper now, we could get, to your point, Phil, like a subsidy down the road in the second phase of it that essentially pays out 20% of that.
But just to be clear, the way PlanCon works is you would still borrow the money. You would make your annual debt service payments and then you're reimbursed. So you get money back, but it wouldn't mean that you would borrow 75 million instead of 90. You still borrow 90, you got to do everything, but then you get reimbursed twice a year.
I think Jim still gets PlanCon money from a project. How long ago?
Yeah, you do.
I think about $1,200.
Every time helps.
Well, I mean, the genesis of this question is that we uncovered all possible sources. When I hear 100% funded by bonds, I'm just concerned that we don't have sources.
In short, we are, I've testified in front of the Appropriations Committee, the Education Committee. I met with the governor's office last week for the Northeastern Pennsylvania region to inform the budget process, and I talked about this. I said a subsidy, and all the data that you look at through the court case through equitable funding, it talks ad nauseum about the disproportionality that exists in schools paying for their everything, right? And something has to occur. So we have some funding coming up. We'll be applying for it. Unfortunately, it's not in these big buckets that I could say is 10 to 20%. It's just things that we're seeing.
And I think the point too is as we go forward, as those things come up, as PlanCon reappears, you know, we can use that to really jumpstart phase two, stage two of the project. We can use those funds to continue what we're doing if it comes back.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I think
The option is always there.
the option.
So you do.
Any other?
Yep, so, while we're in the process of doing this, where are we with, the projects that we've already put in place? Are we still moving forward with those? Everything that we've approved, is in the process of being purchased and, even installed or purchased, so we're still moving forward. We're not freezing our capital funds.
No, we have we have some timelines they're doing. Jim does a good job. I think what we're waiting for now is some of the projects that involve paving and things like that. We'll have to wait till the spring because we missed that, that one window. We hit the first window in the first group of paving and stuff, and then we'll get the second one. But done a good job to your point. We got the pool stuff in here. We've done a lot of other improvements.
Did we get the gators, the two
We
gators?
can't get yet. Or Jim.
There was, they converted over to diesel, right, with
Oh, really?
production, right, when we were.
Of course they did.
Gasoline. So we're waiting for the gasoline production to come back online, that's the best I know. I'm told it shouldn't be too much longer, but it's also told that I.
Tried to give a $20,000 check.
So I think also, Mr. Chairman, as we go forward, what we're going to decide on the facilities, as everyone has talked about, there's a time, a quiet time. And it's certainly during that quiet time, we're going to continue to work on those projects that like we have in the last year. And possibly we're going to try and pick off projects on this list, because obviously, as someone said, you don't need the time to do a renovation at CFC or the high school. That does take too much time. So you're going to have a whole timing issue. You may see things where we're going to say, well, the middle school is priority number one. Why are we working on this other project? And the answer is we're working on the middle school, but it doesn't really begin for a year and a half. And we've got the year and a half to do other things.
Dr. Schaefer, we ordered the curtain, right?
Yeah.
So that's coming, and we're getting bids on lights.
Yep.
For in here.
Yeah, we do have procurement regulations we have to follow. That's
No,
what we're
but
trying
I mean,
to.
we are moving along.
Yeah,
with-
exactly.
yeah.
Yep.
Dr. Schaefer,
I just wanted to tie together Michelle's question with Phil's point. So, for example, some of the projects that we've had, for example, security cameras, to take $350,000 out of the loan, we watched carefully for state funds that came in, and then rather than using those funds from the loan, we applied for the state security and safety tickets, and we were able to free up money from the loan to do other projects, and we came back to the revised list, if you recall.
Right.
With additional projects. So we are looking for those funding sources, and I would expect the very same process to continue throughout this entire process, hopefully on a larger scale. But again, it depends on the revenue sources that present themselves.
And I have an ongoing document that, and I've shared this with you. I've talked about it where, and again, as not an accountant, I have a category that I call like the revenue, the private, getting grants and private money. And that total has been up to this point, I calculated 2.673. And then things that we are paying for, 2.24. Okay, so we're hitting 50,000. SRO, $75,000 grant. Mental health, 150,000. School safety, we got another one for that, for 200,000. So we didn't have any surveillance cams 2 years ago. I mean, we just got 101,000, I think, for teacher laptops. We didn't have to pay for that. That's included in here. I mean, 24% of this investment has been in technology, 29% academics, 25% school security. And you got to be careful when you talk about tech, because all the solutions are pretty expensive, but we know we had to do that. We had to upgrade a lot of things. So, we're doing the right thing, making the investments, but on the other side, we are going after every penny to get that back. And we've done a good job of that. So
That's also why we hired the grant writer.
So, and even the boards are revenue generating, like the new.
yeah, I've got Lehigh Valley in here as well as, the boards are going to be a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean those.
Yeah,
They're revenue generating, and it was upfront money, but they're going to end up making us money.
Right. We've already got almost half.
I don't want to throw cold water on our really important efforts, right? Like looking for all those grants, looking for every penny we can get. And 75,000 for an SRO is not a penny. That's real money in the operating budget. But let's level set, like steal that from Dr. Schaefer, right? We're talking about $142 million school.
Yep.
If we build a brand new school today, right? Like those are like not even pennies. If you're talking about raising money to build a $142 million school today, other than a very small amount of capital campaign money that might be there to help pay for something at that middle school, like it's a bond. It's a bond. It's not private donations. It's not state money. It's not federal money. It's just not there. If somebody can show me an example where public school districts pay for a $100 million or a $50 million, $150 million academic building with anything other than bonds, I'm all ears. It's just, so that's what we're faced with. I think that's what we're faced with.
And then the other side of it is, and we haven't really talked about this, the design for a new school is based on the traditional model. Every student has to be in a seat every day. And, it's like, quite frankly, factory learning. Students go into a classroom, they learn civics or social studies, then do math. So, in looking at how fast technology is, especially in education, is coming, is that assumption correct? Is the assumption that every student has to be in a seat every hour of every day of every week?
I would say, if I could, like my shoot from the hip response is no, and that's why we talk about some of that flexibility and why that design process is going to be so long. Because I don't want, like, I joke with the principal, someone's going to ask you, like, where's my office going to be? And I'm going to say, well, guess what? We're not architects. That's why we say the board makes a decision, and then a year of design, everybody's involved. Like, what does the space really look like?
Right. Well, I mean, my point is the 140 is based on a traditional, for lack of a better word, factory type.
I would say state of the art. If you look at the designs, there was a lot of open space.
No, but it
A lot of
assumes
open space for collaboration with the
every
students.
student is in the school every day.
Correct.
What would the alternative be?
Oh, okay.
Like, what's the alternative to that? Like, if you have like, what would your second grade, like in your mind, right? Like in an AI world, what would a second grade classroom look like?
Well, I think we've seen it before with COVID.
Yeah,
People
it was a
were-
disaster.
No, and I'm not saying, believe me, I'm not promoting it. I'm just saying that the traditional way of schools being built, so every student comes in every day, is not going to stay the same.
I think it's pretty safe to say, like, for the elementary, middle school years, I mean, I can't imagine that's not what the case would be. I mean, where would the children go? Maybe high school, there'd be more flexible learning as technology advances, but in terms of like the sheer responsibility of like supervising, like I can't imagine that we wouldn't have a kid in a seat at the elementary and middle school years.
And again, it could depend upon the grade level, of course, but I'm open to input from the teacher, the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, of like, what is the trend of how a school looks?
Yeah, So I would say in the punting category, this is why we have a year of design. To the lawyers, perhaps lawyer in the room, I would say, we have gone to court with the Pennsylvania Labor Relations Board, and there are many things that we bargain, and when we take a look at and contemplate really flexible models, in some cases, the regulations that we have preclude us from doing things. And I know that sounds nebulous, but I'm now talking to a board where you have examples of that. I've said publicly, you can't replace a teacher. Kids should be in front of a teacher, right? And we recently won a Supreme Court case on dual enrollment. And that had everything to do with what you're talking about. How are we educating our kids in which ways and under what, circumstances? And I think that was probably 6 years in the, or longer in the making. But to your point, I think there's going to be a lot of thought in that design and teachers weighing in about what their classroom, what their space is, what the technology looks like.
And some of those regulations is based on the fact that the school has to look like that. They call it scaffolding, right? There are things generated to make that work and sustain itself, that factory type system. So it's not easy. I mean, to Gretchen's point, it is not easy, and there's a lot of open questions, but the factory model of school, especially with technology today, will not stay the same. I mean,
Yeah. And I will say the more specific, that more specifically answer the question as the way you framed it, and this is more of almost even an older school approach, perhaps. But when we talked about design, and someone asked, well, why are there one wing over here and one wing over here? I said, well, right now we have a synchronous schedule for all the kids in there. This fifth graders have to go at a certain time only because the sixth graders and the seventh graders or eighth graders are in the same spot. You could have two separate buildings that are connected but running on very different time schedules and day schedules and things like that. But when you throw everybody together and you got one cafeteria, you got the factory model. It is an industrialized model because of the way it's built. So these are the things you think about in a design to say, can they be autonomous, developmental?
Ryan.
I just would say, I know I'm new to the board, but I feel like I've been present or fairly right in for the last year. And while each of us brings our own individual professional experiences to the board, I think the one brilliant thing you all did prior to me being here is hire experts who really have a strong point of view and great experience in the space. And I think the experts you hired collectively have more experience than any of us. And so when we look at that, what I hear the experts saying is that the future looks like this, looks like the buildings they presented to us, and the financials models look like this, and the financial models look like this. And while we can negotiate through that, I think we need to say, we hired smart people, let's let them do what they do, and let's learn from their experiences and their professionalism. So I don't see anything that points
You
us
stole
in
my
the-
thunder.
I
I was
don't-
gonna say,
No,
I was gonna say we hired an architect and answered Phil's questions. No, I said we hired Phil's questions answered by the architects that we took 6 months to pick. I mean, that's why we hired them. If I'm gonna start second guessing them, then I'm in the wrong seat.
Well, I will say though, it's a valid point
Mm-hmm.
that Mr. Olson makes, that we could invest 40 million, 80 million, 111 million, 142 million in a building, and we could be wrong. I mean, that could happen. In 1975, they
We've
built
already
a
done
building.
that.
Exactly. In
It did
1975, they had
happen. It did
architects,
happen.
they had experts,
Mhm.
and that
State
building
of the art.
was an abomination from the start.
Yep.
And they had to redesign it immediately, right? And so I think it's a modern world today. It's not 1975, but they could still be wrong.
Well, they
I
could
don't
be,
know.
but
But we can't
We
mitigate
hired them.
that. There's no way to mitigate that.
So I would think
Can
if
I-
that's
okay,
what,
can I
if
reiterate
Mr. Rosen,
though?
that's your concern, then maybe not build the whole middle school now, if we could afford it. Like, if that's the concern, that are we building something too big
Well,
for
that
what we
certainly
need?
mitigates the risk.
Right,
You know?
so I guess what I want to, because tonight's discussion was really, I think, productive, we have pressing needs. We have a must on these lists. We have musts. They need to be done. right? And we do not have the luxury, you know, we had time, but we have been on a path, as Dr. Schaefer pulled up. You know, we've been working strategically this entire time, and we are on a timeline. Like, we have things we need to do. Mr. Azar used in his facilities presentation a word that I teased him on, optionality. And it was the state of having options we decided. But this model enables us to move forward, continually being strategic about what we're investing money in. And should the model change, the way we are approaching this, we still have flexibility, we still have quote unquote optionality. If I want to say, if that's what we've decided it is. We can make one.
It's a word in the Azar.
Yeah, it's okay.
I can look it up.
It's
I think it is a
okay.
word. I think
We use our dictionary, you know. Soon to replace Webster's, right?
It's 25 cents.
Okay. Any other,
Strategy and optionality.
any other comments or,
Well, public comment.
anybody in the public want to weigh in here? Or we call tonight?
Optionality is a word.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vitale.
Oh, you're good, all right.
Okay.
My only concern is, knowing where that may go, difficult to say, there is some money. My concern, and I don't have a child in the building, they're all graduated. They're all in Colorado and Baltimore and everywhere else. So my concern is, we just put these kids through 3 years of disruption. If we do the renovations, I was part of the courthouse renovations back a few years ago. What a nightmare. What a nightmare. And to disrupt these kids again, in their educational process, is my main concern.
I agree.
You know, I mean, everyone's talking about that, I'm sure. The Abington Heights community is worried about money. My main concern as a coach, as a parent, is the kids. We disrupted them through COVID for 3 years. Now we're gonna disrupt them again,
Mrs. Hillebrand made
and
that.
that's my major concern.
That was brought up last week.
Definitely a concern.
She said that
But
exact
the-
comment last week.
The stage, the
Yes.
stage process wouldn't disrupt it.
Would give us the least disruption possible in this current model.
It has to be a concern in every decision.
Yeah, you gotta,
100%.
How we do this, and that, it's gonna weigh in more and more heavily as we go on. Okay,
We're down to Justin, can you cut that?
motion to, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yep.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
School board, don't
You guys
leave.
just stick around for a
We
second.
have